The library of the DeLuca estate was a mausoleum of leather and mahogany, a room designed to intimidate rather than welcome. I wasn't supposed to be here when the master of the house was present, but the coaster under his crystal tumbler needed replacing, and the condensation was threatening the antique finish of the desk. My instructions were clear. Maintain the environment. Remain unseen. I was a ghost in a lilac uniform, a specter whose only purpose was to ensure that the dust motes didn't settle and the silver didn't tarnish. 7 o'clock, Mateo. You promised the senator we'd make an appearance. The voice cut through the heavy silence like a diamond on glass. Vanessa Grant stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid, her platinum blonde hair coiffed into a helmet of perfection that moved as a single unit when she turned her head. She was beautiful in the way a marble statue is beautiful. Cold, hard, and entirely incapable of warmth. She wore a dress of white silk that seemed daringly impractical for a house where a 6-year-old boy lived. But then again, Vanessa didn't dress for the family she was about to marry into. She dressed for the cameras that followed them. Matteo DeLuca didn't look up from the documents spread across his desk. At 33, he carried an air of authority that made the air in the room feel thinner. He was clean-shaven, his jawline sharp enough to cut, with dark hair kept short and disciplined. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, the kind of tailoring that announced power without needing to shout. I said I would try, Vanessa, Matteo replied, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. There is a situation in the logistics chain. It requires my attention tonight. I moved silently toward the desk, my eyes lowered. I swapped the coaster with a fresh one, my hand moving with practiced efficiency. Matteo didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge my presence. To him, I was just part of the machinery of the house, functional and necessary, but ultimately irrelevant. That was fine. Safety lay in irrelevance. You're always working, Vanessa sighed, a theatrical sound that grated on my nerves. She moved toward him, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder. Leo needs a father, not a CEO, and I need a husband who isn't married to his phone. Matteo finally looked up. His eyes were dark, intense, and currently filled with a simmering exhaustion. Leo needs security. That is what I provide. Have you checked on him? Of course, Vanessa lied smoothly. I tightened my grip on the silver tray I was holding. She hadn't been upstairs since breakfast. He's playing in his room. I told him we'd go out for ice cream tomorrow if he behaves. Good. Matteo stood up, closing the file folder. He checked his watch, a piece of engineering that probably cost more than the house I grew up in. I have to meet the heads of the families. It's unavoidable. I'll be back late. He walked past her. And for a fleeting second, I saw the crack in Vanessa's porcelain mask. Her blue eyes narrowed, a flash of pure, unadulterated annoyance darting toward his retreating back. But as he turned at the door, the mask was back in place, replaced by a supportive, loving gaze. Drive safe, darling, she called out. Make sure Leo eats, Matteo commanded, looking at me for the first time. His gaze didn't linger. It was a directive issued to the room at large, knowing I would catch it. No sugar before bed. Yes, sir, I whispered, but he was already gone. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa dropped the loving act like a heavy coat. She walked over to the desk, picking up the tumbler of whiskey Matteo had left unfinished. She downed it in one swallow, her face twisting in a grimace. Useless, she muttered, slamming the glass down. She turned her glare on me. What are you staring at? Don't you have toilets to scrub? I was just clearing the desk, Ms. Grant, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Well, clear it faster. And get that mongrel out of the main hall. I can hear its claws on the parquet from here. The mongrel was Barnaby, a golden retriever puppy that Matteo had brought home 2 weeks ago in a desperate attempt to coax a smile out of his son. Leo, who hadn't spoken more than a whisper since his mother died, had latched onto the dog with a desperation that was heartbreaking to witness. Barnaby was the only thing that made the boy's eyes light up. Vanessa, naturally, hated the creature. She viewed it as a generator of filth and noise, an obstacle to the pristine, magazine-cover lifestyle she envisioned for herself as the future Mrs. DeLuca. I'll check on them right away, I said, bowing my head slightly before retreating. I hurried out of the library and up the grand staircase. The DeLuca mansion was a labyrinth of shadows and expensive art, a place that felt more like a museum than a home. I made my way to the west wing, where Leo's room was located. As I approached, I heard the soft sound of giggling. I pushed the door open gently. Leo was on the floor, a small figure in oversized pajamas, wrestling with the ball of golden fluff that was Barnaby. The puppy was yapping happily, his tail a metronome of pure joy. For a moment, the heavy gloom of the house lifted. This was what mattered. This little boy, trying to piece his world back together with the help of a dog. "Sarah!" Leo looked up, his eyes bright. "Look." Barnaby learned to shake. I smiled, a genuine expression that I rarely allowed myself downstairs. Did he? That's amazing, Leo. He's a smart boy. I knelt beside them, scratching Barnaby behind the ears. The puppy licked my hand enthusiastically. I had been working here for 6 months, hired through an agency that specialized in discreet household staff. I needed the money. My mother's medical bills were a black hole that swallowed every cent I earned. But I had stayed for Leo. Matteo DeLuca might be the king of the city, a man feared by rivals and respected by politicians, but he was utterly clueless about how to comfort a grieving child. He threw money and security at the problem. I offered time. "Is Dad home?" Leo asked, his voice dropping. "He had to go to a meeting, sweetie, but he said goodnight." Leo's shoulders slumped. "Oh, is Vanessa here?" "Yes." The light in his eyes dimmed. "She doesn't like Barnaby. She says he smells." "Barnaby smells like a puppy," I assured him, smoothing his hair. "And you know what? We're going to give him a bath tomorrow, so he'll smell like strawberries." Suddenly the door was thrown open. Vanessa stood there, looming in the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the hallway light. The smell of expensive perfume and stale whiskey wafted into the room. "I thought I heard noise," she said, her voice icy. "It's past his bedtime. Why is the animal in the bedroom? It's unsanitary." "We were just playing," Leo whispered, pulling Barnaby closer to his chest. The puppy, sensing the tension, let out a low, uncertain growl. Vanessa's eyes snapped to the dog. "It growled at me." "Did you hear that?" "It's aggressive." "He's a puppy, Ms. Grant," I interjected, standing up to place myself between her and the boy. "He's just reacting to the sudden noise." "I didn't ask for your opinion, staff," she spat. "Leo, put the dog in the crate. Now." "No!" Leo shouted, a surprising burst of defiance. "He's scared of the crate. He's a dog, Leo. He doesn't have feelings." Vanessa strode into the room, her heels clicking ominously on the hardwood. She reached for the puppy. Leo scrambled back, clutching Barnaby so tight I worried he might squeeze too hard. "Vanessa, please," I said, stepping in front of her. I'll take him to the kitchen and settle him down for the night. There's no need to upset Leo." She stopped, looking at me with pure disdain. Then a cruel smile curled her lips. "Fine. Take the beast out of my sight. If I hear one bark, one single yip, Sarah, you're fired, and the dog goes to the pound." "Understood." I turned to Leo, keeping my voice calm. "It's okay, Leo. Give me Barnaby. I'll make him a nice warm bed in the kitchen. You go to sleep, okay?" Leo looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. He trusted me. Reluctantly, he handed the puppy over. "Promise you won't let her hurt him?" "I promise," I whispered, a promise I intended to keep with my life if necessary. I took the puppy and hurried out of the room, feeling Vanessa's gaze burning into my back. I brought Barnaby down to the kitchen, a vast stainless steel space that felt more like a laboratory than a place where food was cooked. I set him down in his basket near the radiator. Outside, the weather had turned. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that shook the window panes. The rain had started to fall, lashing against the glass in sheets. I spent the next hour scrubbing the marble floors of the foyer, my ears straining for any sound from upstairs. Barnaby was quiet. The house settled into a heavy silence. I was on my hands and knees, polishing a scuff mark near the front door, when I heard the click of heels again. Vanessa was descending the stairs. She had changed into a silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked bored, agitated. She walked to the window and looked out at the storm. "Miserable weather," she commented, mostly to herself. Then she turned her head, her eyes landing on the kitchen door. "Is the beast quiet?" "Yes, Ms. Grant. He's sleeping." "Good." She paused, a wicked thought seemingly crossing her mind. "Actually, I think I left my phone in the solarium, the one near the garden entrance." The solarium was on the other side of the house. "I can get it for you." "No," she said sharply. "I'll get it. You missed a spot there." She pointed a manicured nail at a microscopic speck of dust on the baseboard. I scrubbed harder, keeping my head down. I heard her walk away, but she didn't go toward the solarium. She walked toward the kitchen. Panic flared in my chest. I stood up, wiping my hands on my apron. "Ms. Grant?" I followed her. I reached the kitchen doorway just in time to see her standing over Barnaby's basket. The puppy was awake, wagging his tail, thinking she was there to play. "Disgusting thing," she sneered. She reached down and grabbed the puppy by the scruff of his neck. Barnaby yelped, a high-pitched sound of pain and confusion. "Ms. Grant, stop!" I forgot my place. I forgot the rules. "You're hurting him." She spun around, holding the squirming puppy in the air like a contaminated rag. It woke me up. I heard it breathing. "It's annoying." "He was asleep. Put him down." "I will," she said, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Outside. It's a storm out there. He's 10 weeks old. Then he'll learn to be tough, or he won't." She marched toward the back door, the one that led to the service entrance and the long driveway. "Vanessa, please. Mateo will be furious." I chased after her, grabbing her arm. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to stop cruelty. She slapped me. It was a sharp, stinging blow across the cheek that made my eyes water. "Don't you dare touch me, you filthy little servant. You want to save the dog? Then go fetch." She opened the heavy service door. The wind howled into the kitchen, bringing a spray of freezing rain. Without a moment's hesitation, she threw Barnaby. She didn't just put him out. She hurled him into the dark, wet night. The puppy landed on the wet pavement with a sickening thud and immediately scrambled up, terrified, running blindly into the dark. "No!" I screamed. "Oops," Vanessa smirked, dusting off her hands. "Looks like he ran away. Mateo will be so sad." From the top of the stairs, I heard a scream. "Barnaby!" Leo was at the window on the second floor. He must have been watching, pressing his face against the glass, waiting for his father. Instead, he saw his stepmother throw his best friend into a hurricane. I didn't think. I didn't look at Vanessa. I didn't grab a coat. I ran. I bolted out the door into the storm. The cold was a physical shock, like plunging into ice water. The wind tore at my uniform, soaking it instantly. The rain was blinding, a wall of water that obscured everything. "Barnaby! Barnaby!" I shouted, my voice snatched away by the wind. I squinted into the darkness. The driveway was long, winding down to the main electric gates which opened to the busy coastal road. If the puppy ran that way, I saw a flash of golden fur near the hedges. He was running toward the lights of the street, confused and terrified. The gate. The gate sensor was broken. It sometimes stayed open too long after a car left. If Mateo had left recently, it might still be ajar. I sprinted. My shoes, thin loafers meant for indoor silence, slipped on the wet cobblestones. I nearly fell, scraping my hand against the rough stone of a planter, but I pushed myself up and kept running. My lungs burned. The rain plastered my hair to my face, blinding me. "Barnaby, come here. Here, boy." He didn't hear me. The thunder clapped overhead, a sound like a bomb going off. The puppy yelped and bolted straight for the gap in the iron gates. He was on the road. The coastal road was treacherous at night, even without a storm. Cars sped around the curves, their drivers blinded by the rain. I reached the gate, my chest heaving, just in time to see the puppy cowering in the middle of the asphalt, frozen by the twin beams of light coming around the bend. A delivery truck. It was moving too fast. The driver couldn't see the small animal in the deluge. Calculations flashed through my mind in a millisecond. Distance, speed, impact. There was no time to call him. No time to grab him and jump back. I launched myself. I dove onto the wet asphalt, my body a projectile of desperation. I hit the ground hard, the road tearing at the skin of my arms and knees. My hands found the wet fur of the puppy, and I curled my body around him, pulling him into my chest, tucking my head down, making myself the barrier between him and the world. I heard the screech of tires, the horrible grinding sound of rubber fighting against momentum on a slick surface. The horn blared, a deafening trumpet of warning that came too late. Something hit me. It wasn't the grill of the truck, thank God. It was the bumper clipping my leg as the driver swerved at the last second. The force spun me around on the pavement like a rag doll. Pain exploded in my ankle, a white-hot, sickening snap that vibrated up my shin. My head cracked against the tarmac, and the world went fuzzy at the edges. I rolled to a stop in the gravel on the shoulder of the road. I gasped for air, inhaling water and grit. My entire body throbbed. The rain felt heavier now, like stones falling from the sky. But in my arms I felt a heartbeat. A rapid, frantic fluttering. Barnaby whimpered, licking the underside of my chin. He was safe. I tried to sit up, but the world tilted dangerously. My ankle was on fire. I collapsed back onto the wet ground, clutching the dog. Through the curtain of rain, I saw beams of light cut through the darkness. Not the truck. It had skidded to a halt further down the road. These lights were coming from the other direction, from the road leading back to the house. Mateo must have barely cleared the gates before he turned back, because something had tripped the perimeter, and he never ignored a warning. A sleek black car purred to a stop just feet away from me. The engine idled, a low, predatory growl that I recognized instantly. The driver's door opened. Expensive leather shoes hit a puddle, splashing mud. I lifted my head, blinking against the glare of the headlights. I must have looked like a nightmare. Soaked, bleeding, covered in mud, curled around a wet dog on the side of a highway. Matteo De Luca stood there. He didn't have an umbrella. The rain immediately soaked his suit, plastering the expensive fabric to his broad shoulders. He looked at me, his expression unreadable in the harsh backlighting of the car. Then he looked past me, toward the house. I followed his gaze, craning my neck painfully. Up on the porch of the mansion, illuminated by the warm, golden lights of the entryway, stood Vanessa. She was dry. She was holding her glass of wine, and even from this distance I could see she was smiling. The contrast was violent. The woman he was going to marry, safe and cruel in her ivory tower, and the servant he barely knew, bleeding in the gutter to save the one thing his son loved. Matteo looked back at me. His eyes were dark voids, terrifyingly empty of their usual composure. He took a step toward me, and for the first time since I'd started working for him, I saw something other than indifference on his face. I saw shock, and beneath the shock, a dawning, terrible fury. I tried to speak, to apologize for the scene, for being on the ground, for the trouble. I got him, I rasped, my voice weak. He's okay. My head fell back against the gravel. The last thing I saw before the pain pulled me under was Matteo De Luca, falling to his knees in the mud beside me, his hands reaching out not like a boss reaching for an employee, but like a man reaching for a lifeline. The rain washed the blood from my arm onto his pristine cuffs, staining them irrevocably. The line had been drawn. The masquerade was over, and as the darkness encroached, I knew that tomorrow, the house on the hill would be a war zone. The world was a blur of rain and pain, anchored only by the unyielding grip of the arms that held me. I was being lifted, pulled from the cold gravel and the mud, pressed against a chest that felt as solid as the stone walls of the estate. The scent of expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the earthy smell of wet soil. I tried to pull away, conscious of the filth covering my uniform, the grime that was now smearing onto a suit worth more than my life's earnings. "Sir, your clothes," I mumbled, the words slurring slightly as shock began to set in. "I'm dirty." "Quiet," Matteo De Luca commanded. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried a vibration that silenced me instantly. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. He didn't take me to the car. We were close enough to the house that he simply carried me, striding up the winding driveway with a terrifying purpose. I held Barnaby against me with one arm, the puppy shivering violently, burying his wet nose into the crook of my neck. Mateo's stride was long and even, unaffected by my weight or the storm raging around us. I looked up at his jaw, set tight and hard, a muscle feathering near his ear. He looked like a statue carved from granite, animated only by a cold, burning rage. We reached the front porch. The heavy oak doors were thrown open, revealing the warm, golden glow of the foyer. The contrast was blinding. Inside, everything was pristine, silent, and safe. Outside, we were creatures of the storm. Vanessa was waiting in the center of the hall. She held a crystal glass of red wine, her fingers relaxed around the stem. She looked at us. Mateo, soaked and muddy, carrying the bleeding maid and the wet dog, and her expression didn't shift into concern. It shifted into distaste. She curled her lip, taking a small step back to avoid any potential splatter of mud on her silk robe. "Finally," she drawled, swirling the wine. "I was wondering when you'd come back to clean up this mess. Look at the floor, Mateo. It's Italian marble. Bloodstains are notoriously difficult to remove from porous stone." Mateo didn't stop. He walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture, carrying me into the living room. He kicked the door open with his foot and gently lowered me onto the white leather sofa. I flinched, trying to hover above the material. "The sofa," I gasped, pain shooting up my leg as I tried to shift my weight. "I'll ruin it. Let it ruin," Mateo said, his voice low and rough. He crouched beside me, his hands hovering over my ankle, which was already swelling to the size of a grapefruit, the skin turning a sickening shade of purple and blue. He looked at the raw abrasions on my arms, the blood mixing with the rainwater dripping from my hair. Then he looked at the puppy, who was whimpering softly in my lap. He touched Barnaby's head, a gentle stroke with his thumb, before turning his gaze back to the hallway where Vanessa stood. She had followed us, leaning against the doorframe, looking bored. "Honestly, Mateo," she sighed, "it's just a dog, and she's just staff. You're acting like I committed a war crime. I put the animal outside. It's an animal. That's where they belong." Mateo stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifying. He turned to face her. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He simply looked at her with eyes that were absolute voids. The air in the room seemed to vanish, sucked out by the sheer intensity of his presence. "You threw my son's dog into a storm," Mateo stated. It wasn't a question. It was a summation of facts. "I put it out," she corrected, taking a sip of wine. "It was noisy. You watched her run onto a highway," he continued, taking a step toward her. "You stood on the balcony and watched her throw herself in front of a truck to fix your cruelty. And you laughed." Vanessa's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. She set the glass down on a side table. "Don't be dramatic. She's paid to manage the household. Dealing with the dog is part of her job description. If she was foolish enough to run into traffic, that's hardly my fault. It shows a lack of judgment, really. We should probably let her go." Mateo stopped a foot away from her. He towered over her, radiating a dangerous heat. "You are correct about one thing, Vanessa. Someone is leaving this house tonight." She smirked, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Good. I'll call the agency in the morning and request a replacement. Someone less hysterical. Get out." The words were spoken softly, but they landed like physical blows. Vanessa blinked, her smile freezing in place. "Excuse me? You have 10 minutes, Mateo said, checking his watch. "Pack what you need for the night. My security team will escort you to a hotel. You will not speak to Leo. You will not speak to me. If you are not out of my house in 10 minutes, I will have you removed, and my men are not as gentle as I am." Vanessa laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. "You're joking. You're kicking me out? For this? For a maid and a mutt? My father is the senator, Mateo. You need his connections for the port deal. You can't treat me like this. Your father's influence is a convenience, not a necessity," Mateo said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming lethal. "My son's safety is non-negotiable. I brought you here thinking you could be a mother. Instead, I invited a monster into my home. I looked at the street tonight, and I saw who had value. It wasn't the woman on the balcony. He turned his back on her, dismissing her existence entirely. Marco! He shouted toward the hallway. The head of security appeared instantly, a hulking man in a dark suit who looked like he chewed rocks for breakfast. Ms. Grant is leaving, Mateo said, focusing his attention back on me. Escort her. Ensure she takes only what is hers. 10 minutes, Marco. Not a second more. Mateo! Vanessa shrieked, her composure shattering. You will regret this. You think you can humiliate me? I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone what you really are. Everyone already knows what I am, Vanessa, Mateo murmured, kneeling beside the sofa again. That's why they fear me. You should have learned that lesson. Marco placed a hand on Vanessa's arm. She slapped it away, screaming insults, but he was immovable. He guided her forcefully out of the room. Her screams echoed down the hallway, fading as the front door slammed shut. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain against the window and Barnaby's soft panting. I'm sorry, I whispered, shivering as the adrenaline began to crash. I didn't mean to cause a scene. Mateo looked at me, his dark eyes searching my face. He took off his suit jacket, revealing the holster beneath his arm, and draped the heavy, warm wool over my shoulders. It smelled of him, cedar and rain. You saved a life tonight, Sarah, he said, using my name for the second time. It sounded strange on his tongue, heavy with weight. You have nothing to apologize for. You are the only person in this house who shouldn't be apologizing. Before I could reply, a small voice came from the doorway. Sarah? Leo stood there in his pajamas, clutching a blanket. His eyes were wide, terrified. He looked from his father to me, and then to the muddy dog in my lap. Barnaby! Leo cried out, sprinting across the room. He didn't look at his father. He ran straight to the sofa. Careful, Leo, Mateo warned, his hand shooting out to steady the boy before he could collide with my injured leg. Sarah is hurt. Leo stopped, his hands hovering over the dog. Tears spilled down his cheeks. Is he dead? No, sweetie, I said, forcing a smile despite the throbbing in my ankle. He's just wet and scared. But he's okay. Look. Barnaby licked Leo's hand, his tail giving a weak thump against my stomach. Leo buried his face in the dog's fur, sobbing. Vanessa said she sent him away. She said he was gone forever. Mateo stiffened. I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the armrest of the sofa. He watched his son, a look of profound pain crossing his features. He realized, in that moment, how much he had missed, how much he had allowed to happen under his own roof, because he was too busy building an empire to guard the fortress. Vanessa is gone, Leo, Mateo said, his voice unusually thick. She won't be coming back. Leo looked up at his father, skepticism warring with hope in his eyes. Promise? I promise, Mateo said. He reached out, hesitantly, and placed a hand on Leo's head. Leo didn't pull away. The family doctor arrived 20 minutes later, a discreet man with a leather bag and tired eyes. He set my ankle, bound it tightly, and cleaned the road rash on my arms. He prescribed painkillers and rest, strict bed rest. I can't stay in bed, I argued as he packed his bag. I have the inventory to do tomorrow, and Leo needs to be driven to school. You are not driving anywhere, Mateo said from the doorway. He had changed into a fresh black shirt and trousers, but he still looked weary. And you are not working. You are on paid leave until that ankle heals. I can't just sit around, I protested, panic rising. I needed to be useful. In my world, if you weren't useful, you were discarded. Please, sir. I can polish silver sitting down. I can mend clothes. Mateo walked over to the makeshift bed they had set up for me in the guest suite on the ground floor, a room bigger than my entire apartment. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. Do you think so little of me? He asked quietly. Do you think I would fire you because you were injured saving my son's dog? I don't know, I admitted. Rich people are different. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes, but it softened the hard lines of his face. Rest, Sarah. That is an order. 3 days passed. The house was quieter without Vanessa's sharp heels clicking on the floors and her constant critical commentary. It felt like the mansion had exhaled. I, predictably, was a terrible patient. By the 3rd day, the walls of the guest suite felt like they were closing in. My ankle throbbed, but the painkillers dulled it to a manageable ache. I found a pair of crutches in the closet, probably from a skiing accident years ago, and made my escape. I didn't go to the kitchen. I went to the library. It was the one room that was always in chaos. Books piled haphazardly on shelves. No system, no order. It drove me mad. I was sitting on the floor, my casted leg extended straight out, surrounded by stacks of leather-bound volumes, when the door opened. Matteo stopped in the doorway. He held a tumbler of whiskey in one hand. He looked at the scene. Me, on the floor, in a terracotta cardigan and loose pants, organizing his chaotic collection of history books. "I thought I gave you an order," he said, stepping into the room. "I'm resting my leg," I countered, not looking up as I sorted a biography of Caesar from a treatise on naval warfare. My hands were bored. And this system, or lack thereof, was a crime against literature. He walked over and sat in one of the leather armchairs, watching me. He didn't scold me. He just watched. "You like books. I like order," I corrected. "And I like that books don't yell at you. They just wait for you to listen. Leo is in the garden," Matteo said suddenly. "He's throwing a ball for Barnaby. He's laughing." I smiled, finally looking up at him. "He has a great laugh. You should hear it more often." "I missed it," Matteo admitted. He took a sip of his drink, his gaze intense. "For 2 years since his mother died, I thought buying him things was enough. I thought finding him a mother figure was the solution. I didn't look at the person I was bringing into his life. I just looked at the resume, the pedigree." Children don't care about pedigree, Mr. DeLuca," I said softly. "They care about presence. Vanessa was present, but she was cold. Leo needed warmth. Even a puppy provides more warmth than a socialite. You provided warmth," he said. The statement hung in the air between us. "You noticed she was hurting him when I didn't. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were the boss," I said honestly. "And she was the fiancée. Who would you have believed? The maid who needs the paycheck, or the senator's daughter?" Matteo fell silent. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "That is a failing on my part. A leader should know his soldiers, and he should definitely know the enemy." My phone vibrated on the side table, and for a second I thought it was another message from one of his men. It wasn't. The hospital's number lit the screen. My throat tightened. "My mother," I answered with shaking fingers, keeping my voice low. "Miss Evans?" The nurse sounded tired, practiced. "We need to confirm payment arrangements for your mother's care." "I'm working on it," I said, the words tasting like failure. Matteo's eyes snapped to mine. "Your mother," he said. I nodded. He held out his hand. "Give me the phone." I hesitated, then passed it over. His voice turned calm, cold, and final. "This is Matteo DeLuca. Send the itemized statement to the address I'm about to give you. The balance is settled. From now on, you don't call her for money. You call my office." He ended the call and set the phone down, as if it weighed nothing. "I didn't ask you to do that," I whispered. "You didn't have to," he said. "Your mother is not leverage, and you are not a debt ledger. Not anymore." "I'm not a soldier," I said. "No," he agreed, his eyes locking onto mine. "You are something else entirely. You have a spine of steel, Sarah Evans. I saw you face down a truck. I saw you stand up to me when I told you to stay in bed. I respect that." The air in the library shifted. It wasn't the cold, suffocating tension of before. It was something warmer, heavier. A recognition. For the first time, he wasn't looking at me as a function of the house. He was looking at me as an equal, perhaps even a superior in matters of the heart. "Tell me about Leo," he said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Not his grades, not his schedule. Tell me what he likes. Tell me what he's afraid of." And so we talked, for hours. I told him about Leo's fear of the dark, about how he whispered to the spider plants in the solarium because he thought they were lonely. I told him that Leo wanted to be an astronaut, not a businessman. Matteo listened with an intensity that he usually reserved for war councils. He asked questions. He took mental notes. By the time the grandfather clock chimed midnight, the dynamic of the house had fundamentally shifted. We weren't just employer and employee anymore. We were co-conspirators in the raising of a boy. But while peace settled inside the walls of the DeLuca estate, malice was festering outside. Vanessa Grant was not a woman who accepted defeat. Humiliation was a fuel to her, and she burned with it. She sat in a hotel suite downtown, the luxury of the room doing nothing to quell her rage. She had been thrown out like garbage. She had lost the status, the money, the power. She picked up her burner phone. She didn't call her father. The senator would just lecture her on losing a catch like DeLuca. She dialed a number she had memorized weeks ago. A number she had found in Matteo's private study when she was snooping for jewelry. It belonged to a man named Vargas, a lieutenant in the Sinaloa cartel, the DeLuca family's greatest rivals. "I have something you want," Vanessa whispered into the phone, watching the city lights below. "I doubt that, putana," a rough voice answered. "I have the layout," she said, her voice trembling with spite. "I have the blind spots in the cameras. I have the shift changes of the guards. And I have the override codes for the perimeter gates. Matteo DeLuca thinks his fortress is impenetrable. I have the key." There was a silence on the other end. Then, a low chuckle. "What do you want?" "I want him to hurt," she hissed. "I want him to lose what he loves most. Burn it all down." Back at the mansion, 2 days later, the atmosphere was deceptively calm. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables while seated on a stool, Leo helping me by washing the lettuce, mostly splashing water on the floor. Barnaby was sleeping under the table. Matteo had just come in, loosening his tie, actually smiling at the scene. "Something smells good," he said, reaching for a piece of carrot. "Hey, that's for the salad." Leo giggled, slapping his father's hand away. Matteo laughed, a rusty, genuine sound. He looked at me, and there was a heat in his gaze that made my breath hitch. Then, the lights flickered. It was subtle at first, a quick dip in voltage. Then, the panel on the wall by the fridge beeped. A single red light began to flash on the security console. "What was that?" I asked, pausing with the knife in my hand. Matteo's smile vanished instantly. The father disappeared. The dawn returned. He moved to the console, tapping the screen. His frown deepened. "System glitch," he muttered. "The perimeter sensors in Sector 4 are offline." "Sector 4?" I asked. "That's the back delivery entrance. The one Vanessa used to—" I stopped. Matteo froze. He looked at me, and the realization hit us both at the same time. Vanessa knew that gate. She knew the sensor was faulty. "Get Leo," Matteo said, his voice dropping to a calm, terrifying command. "Go to the library. Stay away from the windows." "Matteo?" "Now, Sarah." He drew his phone from his pocket, dialing Marco as he strode toward the gun safe concealed in the pantry. "We have a breach. Sector 4. It's not a glitch." The peace was over. The rupture had healed the family inside, but it had opened the gates to the wolves outside, and they were hungry. The phone on the kitchen island vibrated, a harsh, buzzing insect sound that sliced through the lingering tension of the flickering lights. The screen lit up with a name that made the blood drain from Matteo's face. Dante, his second in command. It was late. Dante never called this late, unless the world was ending. Matteo answered, pressing the phone to his ear with a force that whitened his knuckles. He turned away from me, his body language shifting from the domestic warmth of a father to the rigid, coiled violence of a Don. I watched his back muscles tense under his shirt. "Report," he barked. Silence stretched for a heartbeat, and then Matteo's voice dropped, becoming deadly quiet. "How bad? Both of them? That's impossible. The suppression system should have—" He listened, and I saw his hand clench into a fist on the marble countertop. "Get the men. All of them. I'm coming." He hung up and turned to face me. The transformation was complete. The man who had been laughing about lettuce a minute ago was gone. In his place was a warlord. "What is it?" I asked, my hand instinctively going to Leo's shoulder. "The warehouses at the docks," Matteo said, his voice devoid of emotion, which was far more terrifying than if he had shouted. "There was an explosion, a coordinated strike. We've lost the shipment, but worse, the fire is spreading to the main armory. It's a declaration of war. Is it Vanessa?" I whispered. "This is too big for Vanessa." Matteo shook his head, checking the magazine of his pistol with practiced ease. "This is military grade. It's the Sinaloa cartel. They've decided to make a move on the territory while they think I'm distracted with domestic issues." He looked at the security panel on the wall. The red light that had flashed earlier had turned a steady, reassuring green. The glitch earlier. It must have been a power surge from the city grid when the explosion hit. "The system is reading clear now. Green across the board." He was rationalizing it. The logic was sound. A massive explosion miles away could disrupt the power grid. It made sense. And he had to go. If he lost the docks, he lost his leverage, his income, and the respect that kept his family alive. He couldn't hide in his house while his empire burned. That was how empires fell. "I have to go," he said, walking over to us. He knelt in front of Leo. "Leo, listen to me. I have to go to work for a little while. I need you to be the man of the house. Can you do that?" Leo nodded, though his eyes were wide with fear. "Are the bad men coming?" "No," Matteo lied smoothly, stroking his son's hair. "I am going to the bad men so they never come here. You are safe. This house is a fortress." He stood up and looked at me. He grabbed my arm, pulling me slightly away from Leo. His grip was firm, urgent. He reached into the waistband of his trousers, pulled out a spare magazine, and then reached into a hidden holster at his ankle to produce a compact, matte black handgun. He pressed it into my hand. It was heavy, cold, and terrified me. "Do you know how to use this?" he asked, his dark eyes boring into mine. I grew up in a bad neighborhood, Matteo. But I've never... Safety is here." He flicked a switch with his thumb, guiding my hand. "Point. Squeeze. Do not hesitate. If anyone who isn't me or Marco walks through that door, you shoot until the gun is empty. Do you understand?" "Yes," I breathed, my fingers curling around the textured grip. "Marco stays here with the perimeter team," Matteo said, glancing at the windows. "I'm taking the assault team to the docks, but I'm leaving 6 men on the grounds. The system is green. The shutters are steel. You are safe here. I will be back before dawn." He looked at me for a second longer, a fierce intensity in his gaze that felt like a physical touch. He wanted to say something else. I could see it in the hesitation of his lips, but the soldier won out. He turned and strode out of the kitchen. Moments later, I heard the roar of his engine as he sped away into the night, racing toward the fire that was lighting up the skyline. I was alone. "Sarah?" Leo tugged at my apron. "I'm scared." "I know, baby," I said, tucking the gun into the deep pocket of my heavy cardigan. It weighed down the fabric, a constant, bruising reminder of the reality we were in. "But your dad is the toughest guy in the city. He'll fix it. Come on, let's go to the library. It has no windows on the ground floor. We'll build a fort." We moved to the library. I tried to keep the mood light, pulling cushions off the sofas to build a barricade, but my ears were straining against the silence. The house felt too big. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and twist. Barnaby, usually a bundle of chaotic energy, was pacing nervously, a low whine vibrating in his throat. Animals knew. They always knew before we did. I checked the security pad by the library door. Green. All zones secure. Marco and his men were outside patrolling. I told myself to breathe. Matteo was right. This was a fortress. The walls were stone. The glass was bulletproof. An hour passed, then 2. The silence of the house began to press against my eardrums. I stood up, needing to move. "Stay inside the fort with Barnaby, Leo," I whispered. "I'm just going to get some water from the cart in the hall." I stepped out of the library into the grand hallway. It was dimly lit, the chandeliers dimmed to a low amber glow. I walked toward the side table where a crystal pitcher of water usually sat. That was when I saw it. On the main security console near the front door, the green light didn't blink. It didn't waver. It was perfectly static green. Too static. A live system pulses. It has micro fluctuations as sensors check in. This light was dead. A frozen image. My stomach dropped through the floor. A loop. They had looped the feed. I ran to the window, keeping my body pressed against the wall, and peeked through the slit in the heavy velvet curtains. The garden was dark. The storm had passed, leaving a heavy mist clinging to the ground. I looked for the familiar silhouette of Marco, or one of the guards patrolling the terrace. Nothing. Then, I saw a shape on the ground near the fountain. It wasn't a rock. It was a man. He was lying face down, motionless. The breath caught in my throat, choking me. They were already here. The glitch hadn't been a power surge. It had been a test. A handshake between Vanessa's stolen codes and the cartel's hackers. They had disabled the alarm, killed the perimeter guards silently, and now they were inside the wire. I didn't scream. Screaming was for victims. I turned and sprinted back to the library, my socks sliding on the polished wood. "Leo," I hissed, bursting into the room. Leo looked up from his coloring book, sensing the change in my energy instantly. "Sarah? Game time," I said, grabbing his arm and hauling him up. "We're playing the quiet game, the super quiet game. Grab Barnaby. Do not let him bark. Are the bad men here?" Leo's voice trembled. "Yes," I said. I wasn't going to lie to him. Lying would get us killed. He needed to know the stakes, so he would obey instantly. "We have to move. Now." I didn't go for the front door. I didn't go for the back door. I went to the bookshelf in the corner, the one housing the encyclopedias. Matteo had shown me this during our long night of talking. A servant's passage that dated back to the original construction of the house in the 1920s. It wasn't a high-tech panic room entrance. It was a narrow, dusty corridor, used for moving coal and ice without disturbing the guests. I pulled the false spine of the volume marked MN. A click echoed, and the panel swung inward. A draft of cold, stale air hit us. "In," I ordered. Leo scrambled inside, clutching the puppy. I followed, pulling the bookshelf closed behind us just as I heard the front door of the mansion burst open. It wasn't a stealth entry anymore. It was a breach. Heavy boots slammed against the marble of the foyer. Voices, harsh and foreign, echoed off the high ceilings. "Clear the ground floor! Find the boy! The woman is expendable!" The voice was rough, accented. Not Marco. We were in the walls. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders. It smelled of dry rot and old brick. It was pitch black. I pulled out my phone, shielding the screen with my hand, to allow only a sliver of light. "Hold my shirt, Leo," I whispered. "Keep moving." We crept through the dark. I knew this passage led to the kitchens, and more importantly, to the wine cellar. Matteo's true panic room wasn't the master bedroom. It was a reinforced vault behind the vintage reserves in the cellar. We reached a small grate that looked out into the main hallway. I paused, peering through the metal slats. 3 men were moving tactically through the hall. They wore black tactical gear, balaclavas, and carried assault rifles with suppressors. They weren't street thugs. These were professionals, mercenaries. "Check the library," one of them signaled. They kicked the library door open, the door we had just left 30 seconds ago. I heard the crash of furniture being overturned. "Clear!" a voice shouted. "Warm! They were just here. Fan out. Check the bedrooms. Check the closets. If it breathes, shoot it. Except the boy. The boss wants the boy alive for leverage." I felt a cold sweat trickle down my spine. They were hunting us like rabbits. "Keep moving," I breathed to Leo, pushing him gently forward. We descended a narrow, spiraling wooden staircase that groaned softly under our weight. I winced at every creak, praying the sound wouldn't carry through the walls. We reached the basement level. The service tunnel opened up behind a heavy oak cupboard in the pantry. I pushed the back of the cupboard open, The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the high windows. It was quiet here. "Okay," I whispered, crouching down to Leo's level. "Listen to me carefully. The wine cellar is through that door. Remember the code Daddy taught you? The one for the special room?" Leo nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Variable 1, 9. That's it. Variable 1, 9, 8, 4. Okay? You are going to run to the cellar. You are going to type that in. The wall will open. You go inside with Barnaby and you press the green button to close it. And you do not open it. Not for anyone. Not even for me. Only for your dad. Do you understand? But you're coming too." Leo grabbed my hand, his small fingers digging into my palm. "Sarah, come too." I looked at the distance. The pantry was 20 feet from the cellar door, but the cellar door required the code to be punched in on the keypad. It took time. 5 seconds to type. 5 seconds for the hydraulics to engage. 10 seconds. Above us, I heard heavy footsteps directly overhead. They were in the kitchen hallway. They were coming down. If we both ran, we might make it. But if they saw the cellar door closing, they would have the location. They would bring drills. They would bring explosives. A panic room is only a coffin if the enemy has time to work on it. I needed them to look away. I needed them to chase a ghost while the boy disappeared. "I have to lock the door behind you," I lied, my heart breaking as I looked into his terrified eyes. "I'll be right behind you. I just have to secure the latch. Promise?" "I promise I will always protect you," I said. It wasn't the promise he asked for, but it was the only one I could keep. I kissed his forehead. "Go. Run." Quietly, I pushed him. Leo sprinted across the kitchen floor, his socks silent on the tiles. Barnaby trotted beside him, sensing the urgency. I watched from the shadows of the pantry. Leo reached the keypad. His small fingers trembled as he punched in the numbers. Beep, beep, beep. The sound seemed deafening in the silence. Above, the footsteps stopped. "Did you hear that?" A voice growled from the top of the stairs. "Kitchen, movement." Leo hit the last number. The heavy false wall of wine racks groaned and hissed, sliding open to reveal the steel vault door behind. "Hey!" A shout from the stairs. A beam of a tactical flashlight cut through the darkness of the kitchen, sweeping across the counters. It missed Leo by inches. He slipped inside the vault. "Close it, Leo. Close it," I prayed silently, biting my lips so hard I tasted blood. The wall began to slide shut. Slowly. Too slowly. The flashlight beam swung back. It was going to catch the movement of the wall. If they saw it, they would know where he was. They would lay siege to the vault. I had to act. I had to become the target. I stood up from behind the cupboard. I took the gun Mateo had given me. It felt heavy, alien. I didn't aim at the men. I wasn't a shooter. I would miss. I aimed at the rack of pots and pans hanging over the center island. I squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked like a mule, shocking my wrist. The sound was thunderous in the confined space. The bullet pinged off a copper skillet, sending the entire rack crashing down onto the island with a cacophony of metal that sounded like a car crash. "There! Contact, kitchen!" The flashlights all snapped toward me, toward the pantry, away from the cellar. I saw the wine rack wall click shut in the periphery of my vision. The seamless wood paneling locked into place. Leo was gone. He was safe. Now I was the rabbit. "Get her!" Bullets tore into the wood of the cupboard I was using for cover. Splinters rained down on my hair. I didn't wait. I scrambled back into the service tunnel, but I didn't go up. I went deeper. The tunnel system had a laundry chute exit that dumped into the sub-basement laundry room on the other side of the house. I threw myself down the chute, sliding uncontrollably through the dark metal tube. I landed hard in a pile of linens, the impact jarring my injured ankle. I stifled a scream. I rolled out of the cart, ignoring the pain. I was in the laundry room. East wing. She's in the walls. Cut her off at the service exit. They were communicating. They were coordinating. I scrambled to my feet, limping heavily. I couldn't stay here. I had to keep them moving. I had to keep them focused on me, and away from the wine cellar. Every minute I kept them chasing me was a minute Matteo got closer to coming home. I ran into the east corridor. I grabbed a heavy vase from a side table and smashed it against the floor. Crash. "Over here!" I screamed, my voice raw. "Come and get me!" I heard the boots pounding on the floorboards above. They were swarming. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a spy. I was a maid. But I knew this house. I knew that the floorboard on the third step of the east staircase creaked. I knew that the door to the conservatory stuck if you didn't lift the handle. I knew that the laundry chemicals were stored in the utility closet under the stairs. I made it to the kitchen utility closet just as the first mercenary burst through the double doors at the end of the hall. He saw me. He raised his rifle. I dove into the closet, slamming the door and locking it. Bullets shredded the wood, punching holes of light through the doorframe. I huddled on the floor, surrounded by bleach and ammonia. I looked at the chemicals. Matteo had told me to shoot until the gun was empty, but a gun was just a tool. A household had 1,000 tools if you knew how to use them. I grabbed a bottle of ammonia and a bottle of bleach. I knew enough chemistry to know you shouldn't mix them in a bucket because it created chloramine gas. Deadly, choking gas. Perfect. I crawled toward the ventilation duct at the back of the closet. It connected to the main HVAC system. If I could get into the vents, I could move. And if I left a surprise behind, I poured the bleach onto a rag on the floor. I opened the ammonia bottle and set it precariously on the edge of the shelf, tied with a string to the doorknob. When they kicked the door in, the bottle would fall. The liquids would mix. The cloud would hit them in the face. It wouldn't kill them instantly, but it would buy me time. I unscrewed the vent cover, my fingernails tearing against the metal. The gunfire stopped. "Breaching charges," a voice yelled. They were going to blow the door. I squeezed into the vent, dragging my bad leg behind me. It was tight, claustrophobic, and filled with dust. I pulled the grate back into place just as a deafening boom shook the walls. The door disintegrated. I heard coughing immediately, retched, wet coughing. "Gas! Clear out! Clear out!" I crawled through the dark metal tunnel, tears of pain and dust streaming down my face. I was alive. Leo was safe. And the wolves were confused, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. The house was big, but the vents were a trap if they figured out where I was. I had to get to the roof, or the garage. I reached a junction in the ductwork. Left went to the master bedroom. Right went to the garage. I went right. I crawled for what felt like miles. My knees were bleeding. My ankle was a throbbing pulse of agony that made my vision swim. I reached the vent above the garage. I peered through the slats. 3 more mercenaries were standing by the cars. They were checking under the chassis, looking for me? No. They were planting explosives. They were rigging the escape vehicles. They wanted to make sure no one left. I couldn't drop down there. I was trapped. Then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A single buzz. I pulled it out, shielding the light. A text from Matteo. "Warehouse secured. False alarm. On my way back. ETA 8 minutes. Status? False alarm." The words should have calmed me, but they did the opposite. If it was a false alarm, it meant someone had tried to pull him away from home. A decoy, a diversion, a spark meant to lure the lion from his den. He'd handled it and turned around. But he was coming back expecting green lights and loyal walls, and the walls had already been breached. 8 minutes. I looked down at the men planting bombs. If Matteo drove into the driveway, they would ambush him. He was expecting a secure home. He was expecting the green light. He didn't know the house had fallen. I couldn't just hide and wait for rescue. I had to warn him, or I had to clear the landing zone. I texted back, my fingers shaking so hard I could barely type. Ambush. House taken. Leo safe in vault. I am trapped. Do not come in front door. I hit send. The message status spun. Sending. Then it turned red. Not delivered. The mercenaries had a jammer. Of course they did. They had cut the cell signals. I was on my own. Matteo was driving into a trap. Leo was locked in a box. and I was in a vent with half a magazine of ammo and a twisted ankle. I looked down at the garage again. There was a red jerry can of gasoline on the workbench, near where the men were standing. I looked at the gun in my hand. I remembered Mateo's voice. Point. Squeeze. I took a deep breath, steadying my hand on the metal of the vent grate. I lined up the sights on the red can. This wasn't about cleaning anymore. This wasn't about order. This was about burning the infection out. I kicked the grate out. It clattered to the floor below, startling the men. They looked up. "Hi, boys," I whispered. I pulled the trigger. The bullet sparked against the metal of the can. The fumes ignited. A fireball erupted in the garage, throwing the mercenaries back and setting the workbench ablaze. The explosion rocked the vent, knocking the wind out of me. Fire alarms began to wail, real ones this time. "She's in the garage. Flank her." I scrambled back the way I came, the heat licking at the soles of my shoes. I had their attention now. All of it. I had 8 minutes to survive. And the whole house was waking up to try and kill me. The heat in the ventilation shaft was becoming unbearable. The metal beneath my hands was searing, transferring the thermal energy from the inferno I had just ignited in the garage below. Smoke, thick and oily, began to seep through the seams of the ductwork, stinging my eyes and coating the back of my throat with the taste of burning rubber and gasoline. I couldn't stay here. The fire would either cook me alive in this steel tube, or the smoke would suffocate me before Mateo ever reached the front gates. I crawled backward, my movements frantic and clumsy. My injured ankle dragged behind me like a dead weight, throbbing with a pulse that seemed to echo in my ears louder than the fire alarms wailing through the house. Every time my cast banged against the metal rivets of the shaft, white spots danced in my vision, threatening to pull me into unconsciousness. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, using the sharp pain to anchor myself in reality. I reached the junction I had passed earlier, the laundry chute. It was a one-way ticket down, but down was away from the fire. I shimmied toward the opening, pushing the grate loose with the heel of my good foot. It clattered onto the tiled floor of the mudroom below. I didn't wait to check if the coast was clear. My feet first slid out of the vent, landing in a heap on a pile of muddy boots and raincoats. The impact jarred my teeth. I stifled a cry, rolling onto my side, clutching the gun Mateo had given me. My hands were shaking so bad I was terrified I might accidentally discharge the weapon and give away my position before I was ready. "Check the perimeter. The fire is a distraction." The shout came from the west wing. They were smart. They knew I wouldn't burn the house down with myself inside unless I had an exit strategy. They assumed I was trying to flush them out so I could run. But I wasn't running. I was buying time. 4 minutes gone. 4 left. I hauled myself up, using a coat rack for support. My reflection caught in the mirror by the door. A woman I barely recognized. My face was streaked with soot and blood. My hair a tangled mess of drywall dust and cobwebs. My eyes wild and feral. The lilac uniform, once so crisp and professional, was torn at the shoulder and stained with grime. I looked like a creature born from the wreckage. I limped into the service hallway. This corridor connected the mudroom to the main industrial kitchen. It was narrow, lined with storage lockers, a fatal funnel. If they caught me here, I was dead. I needed space. I needed weapons. I needed the kitchen. I moved as fast as my broken body would allow, sliding my hand along the wall for balance. The floor was polished concrete, cold and unforgiving. I could hear boots pounding on the floor above, the heavy rhythmic thud of men hunting. They were sweeping the upper levels, pushing downward. They were hurting me. I burst into the main kitchen. It was a cavernous space of stainless steel and white tile, illuminated by the emergency strobe lights that pulsed in rhythm with the alarm. The shadows lengthened and contracted with every flash, making the room feel like it was breathing. I scanned the room for options. The gun in my hand had 3 bullets left. I didn't trust my aim, and I didn't trust the caliber to stop a man wearing body armor. I needed force multipliers. I holstered the gun in my pocket and grabbed a heavy commercial-grade fire extinguisher from the wall bracket. I pulled the pin. Then I moved to the prep station. A magnetic strip on the wall held the chef's knives. German steel, razor sharp, balanced perfectly. I grabbed the largest one, a 10-inch blade used for carving roasts. It felt substantial in my grip. The double doors at the far end of the kitchen, the ones leading to the dining room, shook. Someone was testing the handle. Locked. "She's in the kitchen. Breaching." I didn't hide. Hiding was for people who expected to be found. I was preparing an ambush. I positioned myself behind the heavy stainless steel island, crouching low, the fire extinguisher in my left hand, the knife in my right. The doors exploded inward. Wood splinters sprayed across the room like shrapnel. 2 men entered, moving with the synchronized fluidity of a tactical team. They swept the room with their rifle lights, the beams cutting through the dust in the air. "Clear left," one barked. "Clear right," the other responded. They moved past the island. They hadn't checked behind it yet. They assumed I was cowering in the pantry or the walk-in freezer. I waited until the second man was parallel to my position. I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't scream a battle cry. I squeezed the trigger of the fire extinguisher. A dense cloud of white chemical powder erupted into the man's face at point-blank range. He gagged, blinded instantly, his rifle flailing as he tried to claw the chemicals from his eyes. The sudden burst of white noise and visual obstruction caused the first man to spin around, his finger tightening on the trigger of his rifle. He fired a burst into the ceiling, the sound deafening in the tiled room. I dropped the extinguisher and lunged. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't a move from a martial arts movie. It was a desperate, gravity-assisted fall toward the blinded man. I drove the knife downward. I wasn't aiming for the chest. He had a vest. I aimed for the gap between the armor and the neck. The blade sank into the soft tissue of his trapezius muscle, just above the collarbone. He roared, a sound of pure animal rage, and swung his arm back. His elbow connected with my jaw, a blow that felt like being hit with a brick. I was thrown backward, skidding across the floor. The knife was ripped from my hand, staying lodged in his shoulder. The taste of blood filled my mouth, hot and metallic. My vision swam. The second man, the one I hadn't blinded, had recovered. He stepped through the cloud of extinguisher dust, his rifle leveled at my chest. He was huge, a mountain of black tactical gear. His eyes were visible through the slit of his balaclava, cold, dead eyes that had seen too much violence to be impressed by a maid with a kitchen knife. "Enough," he grunted. He didn't shoot. He marched forward and kicked the gun out of my pocket before I could even reach for it. Then he grabbed me by the front of my uniform and hauled me off the floor as if I weighed nothing. "Don't kill her yet," the wounded man rasped, ripping the knife from his shoulder with a sickening wet sound. He dropped the bloody blade on the floor, pressing a hand to the wound. "The boss wants to ask her about the boy." The giant slammed me against the refrigerator. The cold steel knocked the wind out of me. He leaned in, his face inches from mine. "Where is he?" I spat blood onto his visor. "Gone." He backhanded me. The force of the blow snapped my head to the side, and the world went gray for a second. When my vision cleared, he was dragging me. Not walking me. Dragging me. My injured ankle scraped along the floor, sending fresh waves of nausea rolling through my stomach. I clawed at his arm, my fingernails scrabbling uselessly against the Kevlar fabric. "Walk," he ordered, jerking me upright. "I can't," I gasped. "My leg. Walk or I break the other one." I stumbled forward, putting weight on the broken bone because the alternative was worse. We left the kitchen, moving into the main corridor. The house was filled with smoke now, a haze that hung near the ceiling. The fire in the garage must have been contained by the suppression systems, but the smell was everywhere. They marched me toward the grand hall. The foyer was a scene of controlled chaos. Several other mercenaries were holding positions at the windows, watching the darkness outside. The front door was wide open, letting the cold night air mix with the smoke. In the center of the hall stood a man who was clearly not a soldier. He wore a suit, not tactical gear. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been eroded by years of cruelty. He was checking a tablet, looking bored. This was the broker, the man Vanessa had sold us to. The giant threw me to the floor at the man's feet. I landed hard on my hands and knees, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked up. The man in the suit looked down at me with mild curiosity, as if I were a stain on the rug that he couldn't quite identify. "This is the resistance?" he asked, his voice smooth, cultured, a stark contrast to the violence of his men. "A domestic servant?" "She rigged the garage," the wounded mercenary said, stepping forward. He was pale, blood soaking the shoulder of his uniform. "She burned the extraction team." The man in the suit sighed, tapping his tablet. "Resourceful. Inconvenient, but resourceful. Where is the DeLuca heir?" I stayed silent, glaring at him. I tried to summon the image of Matteo, his cold confidence, his unyielding strength. I needed to be a wall that protected the vault. "I asked you a question, my dear," the man said, crouching down so his face was level with mine. He smelled of expensive tobacco and mints. "We have drilled the locks on the upper floors. The boy is not in his room. He is not in the playroom. He is not in the staff quarters, which leaves the hidden spaces, the panic rooms. He's not here." I lied, my voice rasping. "I sent him away. Before you breach the perimeter." "Impossible." The man smiled, a thin reptile expression. "We have been watching the thermal feeds for hours. No one left the house. The boy is inside, and you know exactly where." He stood up and nodded to the giant. The mercenary grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. He pressed the cold barrel of his pistol against my temple. The metal felt like ice against my skin. "Matteo DeLuca is a man of secrets," the suit said, walking around me in a slow circle. "He builds vaults. He builds tunnels. But every lock has a key. And right now, you are the key. Go to hell," I whispered. The man stopped walking. He looked at his watch. "We are running out of time. The fire department will be here in 10 minutes. DeLuca may be sooner. I need the boy now. If we have the boy, we have the leverage to walk out of here. If we don't," he shrugged, "then we have to leave a message. A very messy message." He signaled the mercenary. "Break her fingers. One by one. Start with the left hand. She's right-handed, judging by the knife work." The giant holstered his gun and grabbed my left hand. His grip was like a vice. He isolated my index finger. "No!" I screamed, trashing against him. "No, I don't know. I swear." "Where is he?" the suit asked calmly. "I won't tell you. You'll kill him." "We won't kill him. He's worth $50 million. You, however, are worth nothing." The giant applied pressure. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up my arm. He was going to snap it. "Wait!" I shouted. "Wait!" The pressure stopped. The suit raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" "The wine cellar," I sobbed, slumping forward in defeat. I had to give them something. A decoy, a half-truth. "He's in the wine cellar. There's a crawl space behind the racks." The suit smiled. "See? Was that so hard?" He turned to the wounded man. "Check it. Take 2 men. If the door's locked, blow it." The men ran toward the kitchen. I squeezed my eyes shut. I had bought maybe 3 minutes. They would find the vault door. They would see the keypad. They would start drilling. "And you," the suit said, looking down at me. "You have been a nuisance." "I don't like nuisances." He pulled a sleek silver pistol from inside his jacket. He didn't look angry. He looked efficient. He racked the slide. "You have served your purpose." He aimed at the center of my forehead. I stared down the barrel. It looked like a tunnel, a dark, infinite tunnel. I didn't pray. I didn't think of my mother. I thought of Leo, safe behind steel. I thought of Matteo. I kept my promise. I thought, he's safe. The man's finger tightened on the trigger. I saw the muscles in his forearm flex. Click. The sound wasn't the gun firing. It was the sound of the main breaker tripping. The lights in the grand hall died. Total, absolute darkness swallowed the room. The emergency strobes in the kitchen were too far away to reach us here. The blackness was heavy, suffocating. "What?" the suit hissed. "Flashlights. Now!" Then we heard it. From the driveway, cutting through the sound of the rain and the distant sirens. The sound of an engine, not a truck, not a police car. A V12 engine screaming at the red line. It was a sound of pure mechanical aggression. Screech. The tires tore at the gravel right outside the front door. "Contact." One of the mercenaries at the window shouted, "Vehicle approaching fast." It's... Crash. The car didn't stop. The front of Mateo's armored sedan smashed through the heavy oak doors of the mansion, sending wood and glass exploding into the foyer. The headlights cut through the darkness like lasers, blinding everyone. The car skid to a halt in the middle of the grand hall, crushing an antique table under its wheels. The mercenaries scrambled back, raising their weapons, blinded by the high beams. The driver's door flew open before the car had even fully stopped. Matteo De Luca stepped out. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up. In his hands, he held a carbine rifle. He didn't look for cover. He didn't shout instructions. He stood in the open, bathed in the light of his own headlights, looking like a demon summoned from the underworld. The man in the suit, the one who had been about to execute me, shielded his eyes, trying to aim. Matteo didn't hesitate. He raised the rifle. The king had returned to his castle, and he had brought the storm with him. The arrival of Matteo De Luca was not merely an entry. It was a localized tectonic shift that rearranged the hierarchy of power within the room instantly. The sedan sat in the center of the foyer, its engine block ticking from the heat, surrounded by the shattered remains of the antique front doors and a cloud of drywall dust that swirled in the beams of the headlights. The man in the suit, the broker who had held my life in the balance only seconds prior, was blinded by the harsh illumination. He raised his hand to shield his eyes, his silhouette stark and trembling against the wall behind him. Matteo moved with a fluidity that belied the violence he was unleashing. He did not seek cover. He walked straight into the kill zone, his carbine raised to his shoulder, his expression a mask of frozen fury. The mercenary nearest the window tried to bring his weapon to bear, but he was too slow. Matteo fired 2 rounds. The sound was not a bang, but a sharp, cracking whip crack that echoed painfully in the confined space. The mercenary crumpled, his weapon clattering uselessly to the marble floor. The broker scrambled backward, tripping over my prone form. He kicked at me, desperate to put distance between himself and the angel of death striding toward him. I rolled away, ignoring the screaming agony in my broken ankle, pressing myself into the corner of the overturned console table. I needed to be small. I needed to be invisible. "Kill him!" the broker screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Shoot him!" But his men were already falling. From the shattered entrance, dark shapes poured in behind Matteo, Marco and the elite security detail. They moved like shadows, precise and lethal. The room filled with the stroboscopic flashes of muzzle flares. It was a cacophony of controlled destruction. Bullets chewed into the plaster, shattered the remaining mirrors, and tore through the expensive upholstery of the furniture. The giant who had threatened to break my fingers roared and charged Matteo, abandoning his firearm for brute force in a suicidal bid for glory. Matteo didn't flinch. He dropped the carbine to its sling, sidestepped the charge with the grace of a matador, and drove a knife into the man's kidney. The giant fell with a wet thud. Matteo didn't look down. He stepped over the body, his eyes locked solely on the broker. The broker fumbled for his silver pistol, the one he had aimed at my forehead. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely rack the slide. Matteo was upon him before he could raise the weapon. Matteo didn't shoot him. That would have been too quick. He kicked the gun out of the broker's hand, the metal skittering across the floor into the darkness. Then, he grabbed the man by the throat and slammed him against the wall. The impact shook a painting loose from its frame. "You are in my house," Matteo whispered, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. It was a terrifyingly intimate sound. "You touched my family," the broker gagged, clawing at Matteo's leather-gloved hand. "It was just business, De Luca, just business. Business is negotiable," Matteo said, tightening his grip until the man's face turned a mottled shade of purple. "This is extinction." Matteo drew his sidearm and pressed the barrel under the man's chin. There was no hesitation, no moment of moral conflict. He pulled the trigger. The broker slid down the wall, leaving a streak of crimson behind him. His business concluded permanently. The room fell silent. The gunfire had ceased. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the security team, the distant wail of sirens approaching from the city, and the crackle of the fire in the garage that was finally dying down under the suppression system. Matteo stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving. He looked around the room, scanning for threats, scanning for movement. Then, his eyes landed on me. I was huddled in the corner, covered in dust, blood, and the chemical residue of the fire extinguisher. My leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and I was shivering uncontrollably from the adrenaline crash. The weapon dropped from his hand. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, falling to his knees on the glass-strewn floor. He didn't care about the shards cutting into his trousers. He reached out, his hands hovering over me, afraid to touch, afraid he might find something broken that couldn't be fixed. "Sarah," he breathed, his voice raw. "Look at me." I lifted my head. I tried to speak, but my throat was parched and swollen from the smoke. All I could manage was a ragged exhale. "I'm here," I whispered. He pulled me into him. It wasn't a gentle embrace. It was a collision. He buried his face in my neck, his arms wrapping around me so tightly it almost hurt. I could feel his heart hammering against my chest, a frantic rhythm that matched my own. He smelled of gunpowder and rain, a scent that would forever define safety in my mind. I thought I was too late. He murmured into my hair. "When I saw the gate, when I saw the fire." "Leo," I gasped, pulling back slightly to look him in the eyes. "The vault, the kitchen." Matteo nodded, his expression hardening again. "Marco, secure the perimeter. Get the medical team in here." "Now!" He scooped me up into his arms. I cried out as my ankle shifted, but he held me firm, carrying me toward the kitchen, as if I weighed nothing. We moved through the smoke-filled corridor, past the bodies of the men I had blinded and fought. Matteo looked at the carnage, the knife on the floor, the scorch marks from the garage vent, and his jaw tightened. He saw the story of my survival written in the blood and ash. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the flashlights of Marco's men who had already cleared the room. The men who had been sent to drill the vault lay dead near the island, neutralized by the team that had flanked them from the garden entrance. The wine rack wall stood closed, intact. Matteo set me down on one of the few remaining stools, keeping a steadying hand on my back. He walked to the keypad. His fingers were steady now as he punched in the code. The hydraulics hissed. The heavy wooden wall slid back. For a second, there was only darkness inside the steel vault. Then, a small, trembling voice. "Dad?" Matteo dropped to his knees at the entrance. "Leo, it's me. It's over." Leo ran out of the darkness, Barnaby close at his heels. The boy launched himself into his father's arms, sobbing. Matteo caught him, burying his face in the boy's small shoulder, closing his eyes. It was a tableau of relief so profound it felt like an intrusion to watch. Barnaby barked, running circles around them, his tail wagging furiously. Leo pulled back, wiping his eyes with dirty hands. "Sarah hit us. She played the quiet game. She went outside to trick the bad men." Matteo looked up at me over his son's head. His eyes were dark pools of emotion, gratitude, awe, and a fierce, burning possessiveness. "She did," Matteo said softly. "Sarah was the shield. Is she okay?" Leo asked, looking at me with fear. "She's bleeding." "I'm fine, Leo," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just a few scratches. The bad men are gone." Marco approached, holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a smartphone with a cracked screen. "Boss, we found this on the leader, the one in the suit. It's unlocked." Matteo stood up, keeping one hand on Leo's shoulder. He took the bag. His face shifted from father to executioner in the span of a heartbeat. He scrolled through the messages, his eyes narrowing. I watched him read. I saw the exact moment the realization hit. It wasn't confusion. It was confirmation. His posture straightened, a cold lethality settling over him like a shroud. "What is it?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. Matteo turned the screen toward me. It was a text thread. The contact name was saved simply as The Source. But the profile picture, small and pixelated, was unmistakable. It was a selfie of Vanessa, smiling in front of a mirror, wearing the diamond necklace Matteo had given her for their engagement. Below the photo were the architectural blueprints of the house, the shift schedules, the override codes for the perimeter sensors, and a final message sent 3 hours ago. He chose the Maid. Make him suffer. Leave nothing standing. The betrayal was absolute. She hadn't just sold information. She had ordered a massacre. She had signed the death warrant for a 6-year-old boy because his father had bruised her ego. She gave them everything, Matteo said, his voice terrifyingly calm. She sold my son to the cartel. She's at the Grand Hotel, I said, remembering where Marco had dropped her off. She thinks she won. Matteo handed the phone back to Marco. Take Leo and Sarah to the medical wing. Do not leave their side. If a fly buzzes too close to them, kill it. Where are you going? I asked, reaching for his hand. He squeezed my fingers, his touch gentle but brief. To make a phone call. He walked out of the kitchen, stepping over the debris of the battle. He didn't go to the car. He went to his private study, the one room in the house that had remained untouched by the violence. I was taken to the medical room, a sterile suite on the ground floor equipped for exactly this kind of lifestyle. The doctor, who had arrived with the second wave of security, set to work on my ankle. He administered a local anesthetic that dulled the sharp edges of the pain, leaving me floating in a haze of exhaustion. Leo sat on the bed beside me, holding my hand, refusing to let go. Barnaby slept at our feet. But while I was being stitched and bandaged, Matteo was dismantling a life. In his study, Matteo poured a glass of scotch but didn't drink it. He picked up the secure landline. He didn't call the police. The police were for civilians. He dialed a number that connected directly to his financial forensics team in Zurich. It's DeLuca, he said. Execute Protocol 0 regarding Vanessa Grant. Sir, 0 implies total asset liquidation and identity flagged for terror financing. That requires significant authorization. You have my authorization. Drain the accounts, every cent. Checking, savings, trust funds. Funnel it all into the charity for orphans we support. Leave her with nothing but the clothes on her back. Then, flag her passport as stolen and compromised by a cartel associate. Notify the federal agencies through a clean channel. Deliver a full dossier to the federal task force that pins her as the leak for the port trafficking ring. Understood. Initiating now. Matteo hung up. He dialed a second number. This one went to the editor of the city's largest tabloid. A man who owed Matteo his career and his kneecaps. Print it, Matteo said. The photos of her with the cartel lieutenant. The drug use. The embezzlement from her father's campaign funds. All the fake evidence we have in the vault for a rainy day. It pours tonight. It will be on the front page by morning, Mr. DeLuca. She'll be a pariah. I want her toxic, Matteo commanded. I want her own father to be unable to look at her without seeing his own political ruin. Make sure everyone knows. She is radioactive. He made one final call. To the senator, Vanessa's father. The senator answered on the second ring, sounding sleepy. Matteo? It's 3 a.m. What is the meaning of this? Your daughter just tried to have my son killed, Matteo said. The silence on the other end was deafening. I have the texts. I have the transfer logs. I have the confession of the men who died screaming in my hallway. Matteo, wait. We can discuss. There is no discussion. If you attempt to shield her, if you attempt to use your office to help her, I will release the files I have on your offshore accounts in the Caymans. You will let her fall. You will disown her publicly, or you will go down with her. I understand, the senator whispered. She is unstable. I will issue a statement. Matteo hung up the phone. He took a sip of the scotch. It wasn't violence. He hadn't touched a hair on her head. But by the time the sun rose, Vanessa Grant would be homeless, penniless, facing federal prison, and abandoned by her family. She would be a ghost in a city she used to rule. It was a fate worse than death for a woman like her. Matteo returned to the medical wing an hour later. He had washed the blood from his hands and face, though his shirt was still stained. He looked tired, the adrenaline finally fading to reveal the toll the night had taken. He walked over to the bed. Leo had fallen asleep, his head resting on my shoulder. I was awake, watching the door. waiting for him. "Is it done?" I asked softly. "She will never hurt us again," Matteo said. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees. He looked at Leo, then at me. "The cartel will retreat. They lost their best strike team and their inside man. They know now that the cost of coming here is too high. We are safe." "The house is a wreck," I observed, looking at the ceiling where smoke stains marred the paint. "It's just wood and stone," Matteo dismissed. "I can rebuild a house. I cannot rebuild this." He gestured to the space between us. He reached out and took my hand. Avoiding the IV line, his thumb traced the calluses on my palm, the rough skin of a working woman. "You should have run," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When you saw the mercenaries, you should have saved yourself." "I couldn't," I said simply. He's my boy too, Matteo." "In here." I tapped my chest. "You don't run on family." Matteo went still. The word family hung in the air, heavy and significant. He brought my hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles, then the palm, then the pulse point at my wrist. It wasn't the kiss of a lover trying to seduce. It was the kiss of a man swearing an oath of fealty. "I have spent my life building walls," he said, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "I thought power was keeping people out. I was wrong. Power is having someone worth letting in." He leaned in closer, his face inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating from him. The intense predatory focus of the Mafia Don was still there, but it was tempered now by something else. Gratitude and desire. "You are not staff, Sarah," he whispered, his lips brushing against my forehead. "Not anymore. You are under my protection. The world will know that if they look at you wrong, they answer to me. You are untouchable." "I don't need to be untouchable," I whispered back, my heart racing despite the exhaustion. "I just need to be here." "You are here," he promised. "You are staying right here." He kissed me then. It was a searing, possessive kiss that tasted of survival. It sealed the unspoken contract between us. The maid and the mobster were gone, replaced by a woman who had walked through fire and a man who would burn the world to keep her warm. Outside, the dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. The storm had passed. The wreckage of the night lay scattered around us, but in the center of the chaos, the foundation held. We were battered, we were bleeding, but we were standing. As I drifted off to sleep, safe in the shadow of the man who had just dismantled an army for me, I knew that life at the DeLuca estate would never be quiet again, but it would be ours. The sun rose over the shattered gates, illuminating the path forward. Vanessa was a memory. The cartel was a warning, and I was exactly where I belonged. Several days passed in a blur of recovery. The house swarmed with contractors, not just cleaners. Matteo was fortifying the castle, but he was also changing it. The cold, museum-like atmosphere was being stripped away. The white leather sofas that had been ruined by my blood were replaced with warmer, softer fabrics. The sharp edges were being softened. I insisted on getting up as soon as the doctor allowed me to hobble on crutches. I found Matteo in the garden, overseeing the repair of the perimeter wall. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a black t-shirt, looking less like a CEO and more like the man who had pulled me from the mud. He saw me and immediately walked over, offering his arm for support. "You should be resting," he chided, though his eyes were warm. "I was going crazy in that room," I admitted. "Besides, someone needs to make sure the roses aren't trampled by the construction crew." Matteo chuckled. "The roses are safe, and so is the boy. He's inside teaching Marco how to play a video game. I believe Marco is losing badly." We walked slowly along the stone path. The air was crisp, smelling of wet earth and blooming jasmine. "I have news," Matteo said, stopping near the fountain. "Regarding our former problem. Vanessa? She was arrested this morning at the airport. She tried to board a flight to Dubai using a fake passport. The authorities were waiting. The press was there too. It was undignified. I felt a pang of pity, but it was fleeting. She had thrown a puppy into a storm and a child to wolves. She earned her cage. And the senator? He issued a statement condemning her actions and stepping down from his committee chair to focus on family matters. His career is effectively over. He chose to cut the limb to save the body, but the infection had already spread. So it's really over, I said, leaning against the stone rim of the fountain. The threat is over, Matteo corrected. But we are just beginning. He turned to face me fully. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath hitched. Don't panic, he said, a smirk playing on his lips. It's not a ring, not yet. I know you like to do things in the proper order. He opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold chain with a small pendant. A shield with a lion engraved on it. The DeLuca crest. This belonged to my mother, he said, fastening it around my neck. The metal was cool against my skin. She wore it every day. She said it reminded her that her job wasn't to obey my father, but to protect the heart of the family. You protected the heart of this family, Sarah. You saved Leo. You saved me. I touched the pendant, tears pricking my eyes. Matteo, wear it, he commanded softly. It tells everyone who sees it that you are under my banner. It tells them that you are the lady of the house in everything but name. And when you are ready, we will fix the name too. I looked at him, at the raw honesty in his face. I had come here looking for a paycheck to save my mother. I had found a war, a child who needed a mother, and a man who needed a soul. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Good, Matteo replied, pulling me close for a kiss that made my toes curl in the grass. Because I fired the agency. You don't work for them anymore. You belong to me. Is that a threat, Mr. DeLuca? I teased, breathless. It's a promise, Sarah, he growled playfully. Now, let's go inside. Leo wants pancakes, and I have no idea how to turn on the stove without summoning the fire department again. We walked back toward the house, the sun shining on the broken windows and the scarred walls. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and dangerous and complicated, but as I listened to Leo's laughter drifting from the open door, I knew it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The bruises on my arms had faded from angry purple to a dull, sickly yellow, a physical testament to how time was supposed to heal all wounds. But the architecture of the DeLuca mansion was healing faster than I was. Within 2 weeks of the assault, the shattered oak doors had been replaced with reinforced steel disguised as mahogany. The drywall in the foyer, pockmarked by stray bullets, had been smoothed over and repainted a shade of cream that looked too innocent for the violence it covered. The house was forgetting. The stone and mortar were moving on. I, however, was not. I stood by the window in the newly renovated library, watching the perimeter guards patrol the grounds. There were more of them now. They moved in pairs, carrying rifles that were no longer concealed. Matteo had turned his home into a fortress, a sovereign state where his word was law and his borders were absolute. And every time I looked at those men, every time I saw the new infrared cameras blinking in the corners of the ceiling, I felt a crushing weight of guilt settle in my chest. They were here because of me. The logic was cold and inescapable. The cartel had targeted the house because they knew Matteo had a weakness. Vanessa had sold that weakness, yes, but the weakness existed regardless of her betrayal. I was the civilian in a war zone. I was the soft underbelly of the beast. During the attack, the broker had used me to get to Leo. Next time, and in this world, there was always a next time. They wouldn't hesitate. They would use me again. They would put a gun to my head to make Matteo surrender, or worse, to make him choose. I touched the gold pendant Matteo had given me in the garden, the lion crest. It felt heavy against my collarbone, a beautiful shackle. He had called me a shield. But looking at my reflection in the dark glass of the window, I didn't see a shield. I saw a liability. I saw a target painted on the back of the man I loved and the child I adored. I loved them enough to die for them. That had been proven in the garage. But the harder question, the one that had kept me awake for 3 nights straight, was whether I loved them enough to leave them. To stay was selfish. To stay was to bask in Matteo's protection and Leo's laughter, while knowing that my presence increased the threat level of their lives. If I removed myself, the equation changed. Matteo would return to being the untouchable, solitary king. Leo would be the protected heir, guarded by professionals, not a maid with a kitchen knife. The decision didn't come with a burst of tears or a dramatic collapse. It arrived with a silent, suffocating clarity. I had to go. I had to scrub my existence from these halls so that they could be safe. I waited until the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2 in the morning. The house was asleep. The night shift security was patrolling the exterior, but the interior was quiet. I went to my room, not the guest suite anymore, but a beautiful room on the second floor that Matteo had insisted I take. I didn't pack the silk blouses or the cashmere sweaters he had bought for me over the last few weeks. I didn't pack the jewelry. I took my old duffel bag from the back of the closet, the one with the broken zipper I had arrived with. I packed my old jeans, my worn-out sneakers, and the few photos of my mother I carried with me. I stripped off the silk nightgown and dressed in my old clothes. They felt rough against my skin, a reminder of who I really was. Sarah Evans, the maid, the invisible woman. I wrote a letter. It took me an hour. I tore up 3 drafts because they sounded too emotional, too hopeful. The final version was short. It was brutal. It was necessary. Matteo, the danger didn't end with Vanessa. As long as I am here, you have a vulnerability they can exploit. I won't be the reason you lose a war. I won't be the reason Leo gets hurt. Don't look for me. Let me go back to being invisible. It's safer for everyone. Love, Sarah. I placed the letter on the pillow. I placed the lion pendant on top of the paper. It glinted in the moonlight, a golden eye judging my cowardice. I turned away before I could change my mind. I picked up my bag and opened the door. The hallway was silent. I didn't take the elevator. The hum of the motor might alert someone. I took the servants' stairs, the narrow, winding steps that I had scrubbed on my hands and knees a lifetime ago. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of grief. Every step away from Leo's room felt like a physical amputation. I imagined him waking up tomorrow, asking where I was. I imagined the look on Matteo's face. But then I imagined the broker's gun at my head, and the fear of that recurring nightmare pushed me forward. I reached the kitchen. The side door near the pantry led to the garden path, which intersected with a blind spot in the old fence line, a spot the new cameras didn't quite cover yet. I had studied the diagrams while Matteo worked. I knew the way out. I reached for the handle of the door. My hand trembled. You didn't take the coat. The voice came from the shadows of the breakfast nook, dark and rich as espresso. I froze. The blood drained from my face. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at him, I would break. It's cold tonight, Matteo said. I heard the scrape of a chair against the floor. He had been sitting there in the dark, waiting. You packed the denim jacket. It's not insulated. You'll freeze before you reach the main road. I'll be fine, I whispered, my hand still gripping the door handle. Please, Matteo, don't. Don't what? His footsteps approached. They were slow, deliberate. Don't stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Don't stop you from abandoning my son. That stung. I spun around, anger flaring bright and hot to mask the pain. I am saving your son. Do you think this is easy? Do you think I want to leave? Matteo stood in the moonlight, filtering through the high windows. He was wearing lounge pants and a dark t-shirt, his hair tousled from sleep he obviously hadn't been getting. He looked tired, but his eyes were alert, burning with that terrifying intelligence that missed nothing. If you are leaving, then you are not saving him, Matteo said calmly. You are breaking him. He just got you back. If you vanish in the night like a thief, he will blame himself. He will think he wasn't good enough to make you stay. He's safer without me, I hissed, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't carry upstairs. Look at what happened, Matteo. The broker used me. They almost killed you because they knew you would come for me. I am a weakness. I am a choke point in your armor. As long as I am here, you are compromised. Matteo stopped a few feet away from me. He crossed his arms over his chest, studying me as if I were a complex tactical problem he had already solved. You think you are the weakness? He asked softly. I know I am. I'm not trained. I'm not one of your soldiers. I'm just Sarah. You are the woman who blinded a mercenary with a fire extinguisher, Matteo countered. You are the woman who ignited a fuel tank to signal my approach. You are the woman who realized the threat before my highly paid security team did and put my son in a vault. You are not a weakness, Sarah. You are the only person in this house who acted with pure instinct. It was luck, I argued, tears stinging my eyes. Next time I won't be lucky. Next time they'll grab me at the grocery store. They'll use me to make you surrender. I can't live with that dread, Matteo. I can't live waiting for the day I get you killed. Matteo closed the distance between us. He reached out and gently pried my hand off the door handle. His skin was warm, his grip unyielding. Do you think I am a man who leaves things to chance? He asked. Do you think I haven't run the calculations? The calculations say I'm a liability. The calculations say that without you, this house becomes a mausoleum again, Matteo said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. Without you, Leo retreats into silence. Without you, I become the monster everyone fears. With nothing to tether me to humanity. A king without a heart is just a tyrant, Sarah. And tyrants always fall. He took my duffel bag from my shoulder and dropped it to the floor. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen. You say you are a target, he continued, stepping closer until I had to look up to meet his gaze. You are right. You are. Because you are mine. And anything that is mine is a target. That is the life. But you are looking at it wrong. You think you need to leave to remove the target. I say we fortify the target until the world breaks its hand trying to hit it. I don't want to be fortified. I sobbed, the fight finally draining out of me. I just want us to be normal. We will never be normal, Matteo said, framing my face with his hands. We are not built for normal. We are built for survival. You said it yourself in the hospital. You don't run on family. Well, neither do I. You are trying to resign from a position that is for life, Sarah. He reached into his pocket. I expected him to pull out the pendant I had left on the bed, to give it back to me. Instead, he pulled out a ring. It wasn't a modern diamond, cold and sharp like the one he had given Vanessa. This was antique, a band of heavy, dark gold set with a deep red ruby that looked like a drop of blood or a burning ember. It felt ancient. It felt permanent. This was my grandmother's, he said quietly. She was the wife of a don in Sicily during the war. She wasn't a soldier either. She was a schoolteacher. But when the enemies came, she stood. She didn't leave. She became the spine of the family. She taught me that the sword is useless without the hand that guides it. I am the sword, Sarah. You are the hand. You are the conscience. You are the reason we fight. I looked at the ring, blurring through my tears. Matteo, I am not offering you a job, he said, his voice fierce. I am not offering you a salary. I am offering you a partnership, a new contract, one that cannot be broken by fear or threats or insecurity. I am asking you to stand beside me, not behind me. I am asking you to be the mother my son chose, and the wife I need. He took my left hand. His eyes locked onto mine, daring me to pull away. You saved my son twice, he whispered. One from loneliness, once from death. You don't get to walk away from that. You are the foundation. If you leave, the house falls. Do you understand? The logic of his love was overwhelming. It wasn't about safety in the absence of danger. It was about safety in the presence of trust. He wasn't asking me to be a victim. He was asking me to be a queen. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice trembling. Good, Matteo said, sliding the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, the weight of it settling against my skin like it had always belonged there. Fear keeps us sharp. We will be scared together, but we will never be apart. He kissed me then, not with the desperation of the hospital, but with a slow, deliberate claim. It was a seal on a document, a vow written in breath and touch. I wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my face in his shoulder, letting the duffel bag on the floor be forgotten. Okay, I whispered into the darkness. I'll stay. You never left. Matteo replied, lifting me up. Now let's go upstairs. Leo wakes up early, and if he finds you gone, I will never hear the end of it. The fear didn't vanish instantly, but as we walked back through the silent house, the shadows seemed less menacing. They weren't hiding monsters anymore. They were just shadows, and I wasn't walking alone. 2 years later, the winter air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and roasting chestnuts. Snow had been falling since morning, blanketing the estate in a layer of pristine white that glittered under the floodlights. But inside the DeLuca mansion, there was no cold. There was only light. The grand hall, once the site of a brutal firefight, was now transformed into a wonderland of gold and burgundy. A 20-foot fir tree stood in the center of the foyer, its branches groaning under the weight of crystal ornaments and heirloom decorations. The scent of cinnamon and expensive perfume mingled in the air as a string quartet played a soft, elegant rendition of Silent Night in the corner. It was the annual DeLuca Christmas Gala, an event that the city's elite clamored to attend. Politicians, business tycoons, and old family allies filled the room, holding champagne flutes and speaking in hushed, respectful tones. But the atmosphere wasn't stiff or fearful as it had been in the years before. There was a genuine warmth now, a vibrancy that radiated from the very walls. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, smoothing the fabric of my dress. It was a deep burgundy velvet, rich and soft, that flowed over my curves and pooled around my feet. It was a far cry from the lilac uniform I had worn when I first walked up these stairs. I touched the ruby ring on my finger, then moved my hand to rest on the swell of my stomach. 8 months. The doctor said it was a girl. Nervous? I turned to see Leo standing beside me. He was 8 years old now, taller, his shoulders broadening. He wore a miniature version of his father's tuxedo, complete with a bow tie that was slightly crooked. A little, I admitted, fixing his tie with practiced hands. There are a lot of people down there. They're just people, Mom, Leo said, rolling his eyes with the confidence of a boy who knew exactly where he stood in the world. Besides, Dad is down there, and Barnaby. I looked down. Barnaby, now a massive, majestic golden retriever with a coat like spun gold, was weaving through the legs of the guests, charming senators and heiresses alike. He was the unofficial mascot of the DeLuca family, and no one dared to complain about dog hair on their tuxedos. You're right, I smiled, kissing Leo's forehead. Ready? Ready. We began to descend the stairs. The conversation in the hall didn't stop all at once, but it rippled into silence as heads turned. I saw the faces of the city's powerful looking up. 2 years ago, they would have looked at me with scorn or curiosity. The maid who married the boss. Now there was only respect. They saw the way I carried myself. They saw the ring. But mostly they saw the way Mateo looked at me. Mateo was standing at the bottom of the stairs talking to a judge. He stopped mid-sentence as he saw us. He was wearing a black tuxedo that fit his frame with lethal precision, but his face wasn't the stone mask of the past. He excused himself from the judge and walked to the foot of the stairs, his eyes locked on mine. He took in the burgundy dress, the glow of my skin, the visible proof of the life we had created together. When I reached the bottom step, he offered me his hand. You look... He paused, searching for a word that was big enough. Victorious. I laughed softly, taking his hand. I feel heavy. Your daughter is doing gymnastics in there. Mateo placed his large, warm hand over mine on my stomach. She has spirit, like her mother. Leo tugged at Mateo's other sleeve. Dad, can I go give Barnaby a pig in a blanket? He looks hungry. Mateo looked down at his son, the boy who used to hide in closets, who used to be terrified of his own shadow. Now, Leo was engaging, happy, and secure. 1, Mateo negotiated. And don't let Vanessa's father see you. He's trying to lobby for a donation, and he's allergic to dogs. Awesome, Leo grinned, sprinting off into the crowd. Mateo wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close to his side. The heat of him was a constant anchor. We looked out at the party, at the life we had built from the ashes of that terrible night. Do you remember? Mateo asked quietly, his lips brushing my ear. The contract? The one where I promised to be the shield? I asked. No, he corrected. The one where I promised you family. He gestured to the room, to Leo laughing with a group of other children near the tree, to Barnaby stealing a canapé from a waiter's tray, to the swell of my belly where our daughter waited to join the world. I have made many deals in my life, Sarah, Matteo said, his voice deep with emotion. I have negotiated treaties that stopped wars. I have acquired companies worth billions. But that night in the kitchen, when you agreed to stay, that was the greatest victory of my life. I looked up at him, tracing the line of his jaw with my eyes. The monster was still there, buried deep, ready to rise if anyone threatened us. But for me, he was just the man who had walked through the rain. You didn't just give me a family, Matteo, I whispered. You gave me a purpose. We gave it to each other, he said. The music swelled, a waltz beginning to play. Dance with me, Mrs. DeLuca, he commanded softly. I'm waddling more than dancing these days, I warned. Then I will hold you up, he promised. I will always hold you up. He swept me onto the floor. As we moved under the glittering chandelier, surrounded by the power and the wealth of the city, I realized that none of it mattered. The marble, the gold, the reputation, it was all just scenery. The real story wasn't about a mafia boss and a maid. It was about a man who had forgotten how to love, and a woman who had forgotten she was worth loving. Finding each other in the wreckage of a storm, Matteo spun me gently, and for a moment, the room blurred. I saw the reflection in the window, a family, whole and unbreakable. The deal was sealed, the debt was paid, and as the snow fell softly outside, covering the scars of the past, I knew that this was finally enough.